I just want to thank you all so much for taking the time to be with us today for our very first session of office hours. My name is Lo, and I'm a digital marketing consultant here at Zuri Group. For those of you who may not be familiar with us, Zuri Group is a full-service consulting agency that works exclusively with nonprofits, from peer-to-peer fundraising, website redesigns, digital advertising, and Google Grants account maintenance, to fundraising strategies, systems assessments and selections, and full-scale CRM implementations, and everything in between. We're passionate about helping nonprofits use technology to build better relationships with their constituents and maximize their impact. As I mentioned, this is our inaugural session of office hours. Every month, our senior strategists and developers will be setting aside some time to talk with you about nonprofit technology and provide an opportunity for you to ask questions. We really want for these to be interactive conversational sessions, so please use this opportunity today to type your questions directly into the chat. I'll be monitoring that and will relay those questions to Chris as they come up. Our host in the hot seat for this month's office hour session is Chris Cannon. Chris is President of Strategic Services here at Zuri Group. His areas of expertise include fundraising strategy and systems, staff and resource management, database management, business intelligence and data reporting, database conversion projects, gifts and data processing, and technology needs. So we're in very good hands today for a conversation about master data management. And everyone remember, I'll be keeping an eye on the chat for questions, so please don't be shy.
Terrific. Well, thanks, Lo, and thank you, everyone. And so we're delighted to be able to do this. Zuri is a full-service firm, but I use this phrase that it's really from A to Zuri, meaning there's very few things that we haven't tried to tackle or help organizations with in the last 11 years since we were founded. But what we're going to talk about today is very near and dear to my heart. We're just talking about data, right? We're talking about the management of that data, in particular, the notion of master data management, which is what is your global organization-wide plan for how you're going to organize that data, structure it, interpret it, store it, report against it, et cetera, et cetera. So the master part in the data management strategy that we'll talk about today is important because what you likely have on your campus, right? So Tammy works for a medical system that also has a medical school affiliated with it. There's lots of moving parts, right? I know we have some folks from VCU on the line, which has 4 distinct and maybe more, I think 4 distinct foundations that are being organized, right? And have to participate through policy, through procedure, through technology, through other venues. And so what often gets lost in the hubbub today, I say hubbub like a really old guy, I feel like a fundraising curmudgeon, and this is why. The most popular phrase in advancement right now in advancement tech is AI, right? AI this, AI that, everybody's AI. And the fundamental challenge with AI in our business isn't necessarily just that it's super expensive to do well. It's not necessarily that we don't quite have the measures, the analytics down yet, I would submit. It's partly that we don't have really good data yet. We don't have Amazon level or Google level or Facebook level data. We have really deep data with maybe a lot of contacts on our top 1,000 records, but our bottom 50% of our records are probably pretty junky. And that's not a criticism, that's a reality of the management of data that the nonprofit sector has faced for since 1974 or so, when the first databases for alumni associations and other organizations started to crop up. So what that means for us today, as we're going to talk through this, is there are some organizational considerations, there are some just bare bone fundamental considerations that don't cost you a dime. They cost you a lot of blood, sweat, and tears because you have to persuade folks to do the right thing. But certainly there's an opportunity for us to just start to get the data right in a way that will allow you to do master data management along the way, no matter how technical those master data management components might be. Data is fundamental, right? And so there are, for instance, in master data management, there are even more complicated notions of unified endpoint management, right? Which is really not just, and we'll talk about what we mean by master data management, but it's not just master data management, but it's using even more sophisticated means to track and do handoffs of data along different journeys of that information and how you might leverage that for your organization. In some ways, when we talk about data and master data management, we're also just talking about basic database integration from one application to the next. And what often happens in those cases is instead of it being a bidirectional feed that's healthy, right, that works, it's a flat file once a quarter that you really hate getting because it means you're going to have a lot of extra work to do maybe manually. So let's jump into what is data management. First and foremost, master data management integrates, validates, and curates your organization's golden records. So let's talk about that for a second. What a golden record should represent is the name, address, unique identifiers, contact information, probably cell phone, ideally these days, et cetera, email, of course, about a constituent, and this is the hard part, whether it's the freshest, most accurate, most up-to-date version of that information. What I would submit to you is that 10 years ago, even maybe 4 years ago, 3 years ago, I probably would argue that MDM wasn't necessary in advancement. And I would argue that historically, because advancement was always the best place for the most amount of records to be correct. And these days, the challenge with that isn't that that's not necessarily true if you didn't have any integration, if you just had silos of data across your campus. But where it's true, or where it's meaningful, is specifically that now that you can start to integrate things more effectively, now that there are technologies that can be harnessed to do this sort of work, we sort of owe it to ourselves, our organizations, to see, can we stitch together more data so we can learn more, so we can do more with that information. So a great MDM is not just that, and part of it is master data management requires, again, great data, core things we'll talk through. Part of it is just, maybe it is that flat file you get once a month. It's the point of that is it is better than nothing for sure, right? But a really great system is pretty close to real time. It means that if you get an event registration on Cvent within the next X number of minutes, you have any updated, newly learned information in your database of record. And that is facilitated typically through some intermediary product or process. That's master data management. That's the way that you're determining, okay, was this Chris Cannon who registered for this event in athletics? Yep, that's him. So where else do we need to take his data and spread it to the right places? So ultimately then, this master data management starts to allow an organization to know that you're the right you, that the interaction you had at the theater when you bought tickets last night was the same you. And wouldn't that be great to know? Or that you brought your kid to the emergency room last night and you as an alum also just visited your alma mater's medical center. These are good things to learn, right? And so we have to know that, who the you is. And in doing that, we also ideally want it to be repeatable, meaning you don't have to build it more than once. Essentially, you set it and you forget it. That's a little tricky, and we'll talk through that a bit. Once you stop and think for a second about Facebook, how many applications on your phone, on your laptop, on your iPad, have you been asked to use Facebook to log in the last month, 2, 3? Maybe a million, right? Maybe every single one, right? Why? Why does a third party not affiliated with Facebook want you to use Facebook to authenticate your information with that? Facebook knows it's the right you. And if you tell Facebook it's the right you, then the next vendor, that third party app, that Yelp or whomever it is that you're looking up a restaurant to go to in San Diego last night, that becomes a way to know that it's the right you. And that's part of the real technical complexity that we face, which is the places that do MDM really well are mostly corporate organizations valued at $500 billion of market value or more. And we are not that, right? We don't have 10,000 developers and programmers working, in Northern California toward the end of master data management. So we have to be realistic about this, but there are some solutions that are becoming increasingly available. While we're not Facebook, while we don't necessarily have that level of potential for integration of data and that repeatability off the bat, we do certainly have some data sources that would make sense to start to consider to bring into some sort of golden record arrangement, right? So there's some healthcare folks on the phone. Grateful patient is the obvious answer. But even things like, most healthcare organizations, the big ones, employ 20,000 people these days, having MDM for your employees and for, that visiting traveling nurse or what have you, that, who, he's there for 6 months out of the year, those kinds of things start to become pretty valuable or interesting to explore. Athletics, for sure, for some of the universities on the line here, is a great need. If maybe you're in a cause and cure group and you have some medical components, of course, there's privacy issues to consider there, but knowing about volunteerism for the organization and giving and maybe some other details that are scrapable in ethically, I should say, scrapable and available for you to try to integrate. These are the things that help your master data management environment become tighter and tighter, better and better, and your golden records will be more and more pristine. And that's really the point of all of this. All right, so some of the why it matters is readily apparent. That's why we're all on the phone, right? You can consider additional data sources that would augment your database of record to get to a single source of truth about the right information. A single source of affirmation that if I go to this field, I can use that address, that piece of mail is going to go to Chris. That's important, right? It's really critical. It increases the completeness and the freshness of data. And so one of the reasons that I've had this sort of epiphany and change from, why master data management outside of the advancement record would matter is that 10 years ago, I think the advancement record for nearly every organization was probably the best shot at the data you're going to get. Well, now, again, if I go and register for an event through a department on campus, but not, that is, say, no gift component, right? I might have given you a new email, new cell phone, new address, and my spouse's name who attended the event with me. Do we have that in our database of record? I don't know, but now you have it on campus somewhere. How can you go get that information? And so, siloed information is bad, not in that there's sort of these gradations of badness. I always say that blanks are worse than having something, right? I'd like for the something to be accurate and complete and timely. It's not always. But if it's a siloed database that isn't integrated, somebody's probably benefiting from that on campus or whatever. But the problem does become that you then have two competing sources of truth. And, our constituents don't really want to know or care about how interdepartmental inefficiencies might affect their ability to update their address, right? So somebody updates their address with a registrar for a transcript request, and that information doesn't get down to the advancement team, who then sends a solicitation note to, Anne's parents, who then say, Anne, why do we keep getting mail from your alma mater? What do they, do they know what they're doing, right? So the siloed data is bad. It's better than nothing at all, but there are ways then to take all of this data and try more and more ways to integrate. So I want to pause for a second and talk just briefly on when we say master data management here, we're talking about a range of options, right? Master data management can start on the technical sort of data exchange side. It can start with a one-way inflow of data through a spreadsheet that somebody keys into an even better source, right, to get closer to a golden record. Not great. It's what everybody did 15 years ago, ish. And so it'd be nice if we didn't do it anymore, but sometimes we have to do it that way. The next level up is maybe you have a data warehouse. You have a couple disparate applications, athletics and advancement and, maybe 2 or 3 others. And the data warehouse is used really as a master data management hub, right? And some kind of golden record set of unique identifiers is included in that data warehouse. So at least you can exchange data efficiently. And then you get into the sort of notion of a data lake where you're not only taking structured data in a data warehouse, but unstructured data, and you're trying to make a match with, for instance, social data management, right? Is that the right Chris Cannon who just posted on his Instagram that he was on campus today? That'd be interesting to know, right? But Instagram is a little harder to link because of the lack of specificity for usernames. It is just literally harder to have a direct confirmation compared to, say, LinkedIn, that, yep, that's the right Chris Cannon. And so dealing with unstructured data, et cetera, starts to get into the realm of really big ticket master data management opportunities that for our institutions are, probably, I think of these as sort of, if you're taking courses, right, this is an overview course, and many of you have heard and thought of the things I've already said for sure. What I just mentioned about, dealing with unstructured data, that's like a 400 level course, right? You might do that for your senior thesis even. That's going to be a little bit tricky. But as you can stitch more and more of this information together, it just bodes well for the organization. And because we're nonprofit organizations, we also need to just remind ourselves that things are a little different for us. Nearly categorically, we're 10-ish years behind in adopting the same tech that's available in the corporate world. And that is predominantly because of cost, also because of vendor focus and availability, meaning if you were building master data management, would you focus on organizations who need to make sure that they are as lean as possible so their missions get as much of the philanthropy they're generating as possible? Or do you build a master data management solution for Nike, right, or Coke, what have you? So we're behind in part because of just the dynamics of the market. We're also behind, though, I would say, because the match rates were not something that our industry stomached very well. And very specifically, many of you might know David Lawson. He's a great, smart guy, entrepreneur, done a mighty good work for our industry in doing things like founding PIN, the Prospect Information Network, 25 years ago for data screening, et cetera. So he has a company called NewSci, and he's working with IBM's Watson, and he's doing really cool stuff. And this was 3 years ago. This is probably about my time that I really went the MDM route in my little brain, whereby we're having lunch, and he said, in this data lake environment that is being scrubbed by different algorithms that he's establishing through IBM Watson, I can get an 80% match rate on notes, on free text from the internet to your alumni, to your constituents in a healthcare setting. And I said, well, as neat as that sounds, the 20% that are wrong are just going to drive the VP of development nuts. A 20% error rate, which is how I took it. He thought it was 80% accurate. He was correct. I heard a 20% error rate that you have to sell to a VP of development who doesn't want to accidentally mail someone who's deceased, or doesn't want the wrong person who isn't on her board to be stitched together with data of someone who is on our board, right? So that risk factor was too great. And so we're getting better. And so because those tools are better, we're getting closer to, I think, being acceptance of still, an error rate in some of this MDM stuff. But certainly the data integrity is higher. Certainly there's more opportunity. I think there's more willingness to experiment. And so, for instance, the types of AI efforts that are underway that are intellectually, to me, I think they're very interesting, maybe a little ambitious, maybe a little not quite disingenuous, but a lot of AI in our space right now is really just in machine learning. It is regression analysis that we've all been doing for 30 years. So it's not maybe as neat as it is. It's just been repackaged in some ways, but it's progress, right? And so we have changed, I think, as an audience to accept some of that progress, and we're getting to a point of saying, well, we probably should get on board with this. And so what is that going to take, right? What kinds of things are we going to need to make master data management work? So, maybe not ironically in my view, but for certain, getting to a organizational readiness is as important as the technical aspects of master data management. You need organization-wide data governance in order to do master data management well. The audiences that have the different applications, that have the different data sets, need to agree on who gets to win in the golden record and why, and what the timing of those new pieces of data will be. Therefore, you need data standards and metrics, right? So you need for your data to be hopefully date stamped, and you need for more information about the source of that data, right? So if I go online, update my data at my alma mater, and then 3 days later, a plain giving effort did some screening and got data that might be 2 years old, which one wins? Well, probably the information I just gave you online, but you need standards in place for those sorts of things. You're going to need to have integration experts, people who can eventually, do this sort of work. And you're going to have to persuade constituents to hopefully share their information or feel that, make sure you're doing it in an ethical way. So we don't want a Cambridge Analytica scenario where people don't know what's happening and then voila, your organization starts to be like, creepy, right? We don't want master data management should not result in those sorts of things. So what part of this means is that it's probably a long play, right? There are some applications, we'll talk about those. I'm curious if anybody in chat wants to throw in what they are experiencing, they have purchased or put together. So these are the sorts of things that if you're already doing it, let us know. If you have some things you're happy with or not happy with, please put it in chat. To prepare, you got to catalog your operations and applications. You need to see what would be an acceptable addition to the golden record. And this is interesting, right? I have this little phrase I say a lot that nearly everybody feels like if they control something, it's under control. And when I look at some data sets in that universe of potential MDM sources that could go together for the golden record, they're not always that good. If someone is keeping their own Excel spreadsheet and they want that to be part of the golden record environment, audit the Excel sheet first, and I'm pretty sure you're going to find that, at best, it's evenly inaccurate to any other data source, but it's probably worse. And so really we're talking about evaluating your options for what's available. In social data is a great example, where you can find the kinds of, again, within ethical parameters, within the spirit and nature of the data usage licensing that the LinkedIn and the Facebook sort of companies have. What can you go get, and therefore should you go get it? And more importantly, not just get it to have it, but how's it going to help your programming? Will you be doing some more targeted things with that information? And so when ultimately you put these things together, you should have some kind of understanding of how important would a distinct master data management application and effort be, versus do you just go along with having your database of record right now be your golden record, which is still, for many organizations, still going to be the reality, and it's still an acceptable reality. But what that then means is you should probably start to seek ways, if you're, say the Raises Edge, which is predominant, or Salesforce, or Millennium, or any of these applications, if you're using any of those applications and you're happy with that, because you don't have a lot of external sources of data you feel like you could go get, you don't maybe have the dollars or technology to make that happen, then how could you make that record in your database of record increasingly good? And then where do you go try to find external sources when necessary to make it even better?
We do have a question. Would you be able to provide an example of an organization that's really good at this and what they're doing?
In the nonprofit space, not many, to be honest, because we're sort of just getting into it. The places that are best with this, and I'll give you an example. Wake Forest University has been working with a group called SSB that is trying to integrate their athletics department and the fan purchase and other kinds of athletics page data. If you look at athletics, a lot of the communications about athletics programs and almost all the merchandising for athletics programs, it's all been outsourced. And so there's a third party with good data. There's the athletics program with, say Pacquiolin or something. They know the ticket purchases, they know the season ticket holders, and then there's a database of records. So Arizona State University is working also on that level of integration. I was in a talk with them Monday at a Salesforce conference in San Diego about their entire environment. And so I would say those two. Arizona State's a good example. And then the second thing I would say is that there are lots of, in the healthcare space, for example, there are a lot of really good grateful patient programs that are getting to this kind of level of master data management, but in that just for that program, right? So places like University of Minnesota, I helped spin up their grateful patient program with a fellow named Dan Lance years ago. It was great, and it was smooth, and it was cool, and that it's like by the next morning, all their data was clean and ready to go, and they could trust that they should move forward in the following ways with the data that they'd integrated, and that they had a master record to work off of, if you will. But they didn't have an employee data file that was coming in and also part of an MDM golden record environment. So they could have been broader. And I suspect if we looked at some of our other team members, who we're working with and what they're seeing, that we're seeing a lot of data integration. That's in something, frankly, that Zuri does really well. But the application of a dedicated data governance practice around master data management with then probably a tool for master data management like Reltio or SSB or Informatica or Pitney Bowes has a Spectrum data hub that if you do really big data mailing, if you do a lot of direct mail, that Pitney Bowes system is what, for example, RNL, the campus call folks at the Noel Levitt's team, that's the product they use to manage all of their, tens of millions of mailings a year to get at a golden record, if you will. So there are examples out there, and so thanks for the question. And if you're in the university space, I would say ASU is probably your best bet. The Wake instance I mentioned, they're in process, so they're not as far along. And beyond that, for instance, University of Virginia is in the process of using a product, also SSB, it turns out. And this is really, for some of us online, I was looking at who was participating. Some of you have the kinds of data source problems that are, it will drive you nuts, and you're, complex in that way. Others might just have a few, fewer sources of data, which is lucky you in some ways. At UVA, they have 18 different foundations. It's 18. And so to get to that golden record, they decided to, they use Advance for their core database of record. Almost every one of those 18 foundations has their own database, and they're, meeting in the middle with a master data management strategy. So those are some of the options that I might consider. And I don't know if Andrew from our team is on the line.
I think those examples are wonderful. I go back to a similar example at the Air Force Academy, where they had the athletics separate from the university and the advancement, and had to find a way to actually bring those together. I see a question around cloud-based versus systems that are local versus data sheets that I get at events, pulling those disparate systems together.
Yeah, lowest common denominator, right, is that there's going to be lists, either in Excel, maybe even in paper form, and what do you do with those? And I've had this rule of 1, 100, 1,000 for a couple decades, which is if you're from 1 to 100 of something, you're probably not going to automate it. You're probably not going to find a great solution except starting to key it in. If you're between 100 and 1,000 rows of something, you really should start to think about automating that, right? And if it's just automating the import of that, or in this case, maybe it's, do you have maybe you use like Importomatic, Listomatic, if you use the Razor's Edge, for instance, and you just want to house those records outside of your database of records so you kind of figure them out, but you don't want to lose them. That's a nice sort of easy to implement structure, and you can do that in a data warehouse with, SSRS or SQL Server, et cetera. So that's round one, and then over 1,000 incidentally, don't key a thing. Either get a programmer, call a programmer, call us and figure it out, because that'll break your soul to have to do 1,000 of anything manually. So in addition to that, then I would value the, score the data, right? The attendance at events is a clear hand raising by that constituent of interest in your organization. So losing that information is not tolerable. And so what that probably means is figuring out better ways to do event registration, and then figuring out ways to pull that data out of an automated event registration system and putting that into the area that your golden record lives. When I did this project with the University of Minnesota to do the Grateful Patient program, it felt a little science fiction-y because it was pretty early in, but it was cool. And where the coolness really resided is within a few hours, not only could you get the data, but you could have screened the data through an outside third party. And then you could use that to ping your colleagues to say, hey, your person, to whom you've been assigned, just checked into this thing, right, this doctor's visit or this medical center visit. And now right? And if you have an appropriate culture to do on-site visits, great. If not, well, you have other strategies to do. So you really want to get to a point of, some of this data is, incredibly valuable to know about the real relationship you have with that constituent. So that's part A. Part B, if it's local, what you might find is that the import-export tools of your database are maybe sufficient to take that Excel file and dump information in an automated fashion. Cloud-based issues and we're seeing this a bit with Blackbud CRM in particular, and definitely RENXT. If you don't have access to do some of the API level work that you'd like to do to push data in and out, that could be a concern. And so one of the things we've done with those applications is we've created a separate data warehouse sync that can live anywhere you need it to, so you can gain access to it. So that for master data management, it's a good question, because not only do you have different departments with different information, different table structures, right? All of the things that come with having, an application for student enrollment, plus employees, plus your alumni registration for events, plus your database of record for advancement. But they're also maybe in different avenues, so they're in different locations. So some might be central IT has access, others might be a third party through software service has access. What I can tell you is that if you do that first analysis of, okay, how many records do I have and how valuable are those records? If you have enough valuable records, the opportunity to put all of those things into a master data management solution, whether that again is a data warehouse, it's your database, but you trust your database is gathering all these other pieces, or it's a master data management software, right? Like IBM, Oracle, SAP make these huge packages that, Fortune 100 companies use. If you look at Gartner, they have a master data management magic quadrant. So if you look at Gartner, GARTNER, that'll show you that SSB actually doesn't show up on that list, which is kind of interesting because they have a pretty good client list. But Informatica is considered the best tool, and that works well with Salesforce, works well with SQL, Microsoft Stack products, Orchestra Networks, Stibio Systems, I don't know if it's Provisi or it's probably Prophecy, which is dumb, but it's PROFISEE, however they pronounce it. And these are, sort of industry leaders, and those things, if you had enough time and energy and it was worthwhile enough, and that's probably the most important thing. If you do the data governance piece and you do the cataloging of what you have, it'll help you understand, right? Oh man, we don't know in our database this important thing that database has. Can we bring it into our system, or create a master data management middleware that creates our database of records? Those are some of the companies you might want to consider. We like to say that we lower P partner like a verb with all organizations. We've done a ton of integration and this sort of work with lots of different applications. So we don't big P partner with any of the folks that I just mentioned, and so feel free to reach out to those. Again, we talked a little about the criteria for when you should make a choice, right? Is it big enough? Is it valuable enough data? What we're hearing of folks learning along the way is that if you don't have definitions in place and ownership in place and data governance, then the technology is a means to an end, for sure, in this case. So you have to have those things first in order to get moving. Therefore, what we're hearing a bit in terms of going forward is that in some cases we've talked with our clients and other organizations that have decided not to become overly formal and comprehensive in their master data management yet, because they're outliers, right? Because they're politics. So there's a university in Canada, let's just say, that the dean of the B school, incredibly influential person on campus, decided to do something totally different than the advancement team, but then said, I want all your data. And they said, well, what are you gonna do with it? And so their solution was to say, here's a subset of all of the data that you have and that we have, and let's put it into a master data management arrangement that then gives the organization a chance to say, we trust that Chris at this address with this email with this phone number is the right Chris. If he's engaged with a B school, you have a bunch of other data that you can track. If he's involved with advancement and is given gifts, et cetera, all that data is involved. So it could sometimes be, in terms of figuring out what to do differently, the organizational change management, the organizational hurdles are often way harder than the technology. And so not getting overly exuberant about all the cool things you can do until you persuaded people to do the cool things is something that has certainly been important. Andrew, I didn't introduce you earlier when I asked your opinion, that Andrew is coming on board with us fairly recently from a really neat background of having built some products in the fundraising space over the years, having worked 2 or 3 of the big dogs in the fundraising technology space. And so he's seen a lot of organizations deal with MDM. So I wonder, what would you say that your clients have learned over the years to avoid some obstacles that our colleagues on the phone might run into?
I think back to the golden record part, understanding and having a single source of truth that you can bring in lots of other data, understanding when, not just what data is coming in, but when it came in and where it's coming from. So it's kind of a bit of your who, what, when, where. The audit trail for financial systems is something I think that master data management takes into the fundraising world really well. It's an audit trail like that in that respect, that done correctly gets you back to the point of the relationship done right.
So one other quick thought on things to do differently here, and it gets a little at all the things in our space. It gets at AI, and it gets at predictive and prescriptive modeling, and it gets at the ways that we just broadly should handle data. Is that your organization has a subset of records that some groups call a VIP set. I have this little phrase, front of the line group, right? And we kind of know who those are, right? It's your board, it's your best donors, it's your top prospects, it's the brother of your board chair, even though he's not a donor, right? It's this weird group. And I just want to point out that that is a group where automation and, sort of leaving it to chance, if you leave it into technical chance, becomes a little risky, meaning I wouldn't allow any master data management to directly touch my top 1 or 2% of my records. This period. I would create a feedback loop to learn what we could be learning and then decide if I want to put it into their records distinctly. But it's risky, frankly, to do a national change of address update or something on your board members' records, because you probably know where they live because they were there at the last board meeting and looked at their, you've got different ways to affirm that at a level that a very small percentage of your records, where all this automation we're talking about is actually maybe more risky than not doing it. So it's a thing to consider. And so when you talk about things like AI and data management, but you have a board chair whose name is John Adams, you're going to have a much harder time learning anything in any of those kind of automated fashions, because it's going to be harder to know if you've linked the right John Adams, right? A couple other thoughts here in terms of questions, challenges, issues, next steps. My challenge to you would be to ask yourself if your organization is ready to start from the beginning. And that is not calling a vendor about master data management, the technology. It is internally, or maybe calling a firm that could help you think about how to get the data governance going, how to get the metrics in place, how to get the data standards in place, how to catalog your applications, how to look for fit gap against all those things first, because the tech you buy is only going to solve, it's a means to an end. And so it'll look shiny, it'll look cool, like real excited to get it, but you have to do that work first. And so the issues are going to be for you, is my organization ready? If you have a registrar who can't sit in the room with your advanced and services director because they argue about changing records without legal documentation of a marriage, you got to deal with that before you deal with MDM. And if you have, pick a department, if you have compliance issues around grateful patient, you got to deal with that before you can deal with the technology piece. And so your next steps, hopefully, from this are to think about, did you learn where you're not doing these things yet? If you're ready to talk technology because you've done all these things, congratulations, and go get them. But make sure you've done the other things first, because those steps of cataloging, et cetera, will really inform what your next effort should be, so that even if your golden record still is in your database, and that's the best place for it, and there's no other need for new technology, you probably have other data sources that you could start to figure out how to put it in there. Maybe all of those data sources go into a middleware master data management application that better informs the entire organization. That would be great. Really, not doing anything anymore is a bad strategy. And that's a realization that I've been coming to, having, again, for years thought, well, my advancement, and this is right, my phrase, when you control something, it's under control. When I was at St. Louis University and managed our banner database, which was horrible, the data were pretty good, and I could tell you what the numbers were, and what percentage of accurate addresses we had, et cetera. So I felt pretty confident about it. And that's probably why I thought for so many years, why would I need to have a separate master data management system? Because I got a good data set right here. Well, these days there's so many ways, so many sources you could add to it, that exploring how to add to it might then lead you to needing a more robust master data management environment overall. If you want to talk more about that offline or have questions, feel free to reach out. But we wanted to have this first office hours just as a way to share what we were thinking was an important topic. I think this is critically important, and I think that you'll be hearing more from us about it. You'll probably be hearing more from folks internal to your organization about it if you're not leading the charge to begin with. And we really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you to everybody who joined. I know that master data management is a big topic and it can feel really overwhelming. If your organization has not started coming up with a data governance policy and started thinking about data management, I will be sharing a link with you. Kate Nimity, one of our consultants here, actually put together a white paper on data governance and data management that breaks it down into really actionable steps. She has some worksheets that are included in it to sort of help you make more sense of it, breaks down the different methodologies that are available and makes it more accessible. So I will definitely be sharing that. But we just want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us today. And thank you to Chris. Today we will have a recording of today's session, so I'll go ahead and send that out to everybody when that's available. And of course, if you have any questions about what we've talked about today, or if you've got an upcoming project that we can be of assistance on, please reach out to us at innovations@zurigroup.com. We'd love to speak with you. And we'll see you for next month's office hours. Thank you, everyone.